أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا طاهرا مباركا فيه وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من عبادك الراشدين. All praise due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, peace and blessings be upon His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We're continuing inshallah with the history of the Khulafa al-Rashideen and during the Khilaf of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu and the fall of the Persian Empire. Continuing where we stopped last week with the opening of the last battle that we mentioned is the opening of Al-Mada'in, which was the center of the Persian Empire at that time, and how it was opened by the Muslimin, by Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiyallahu anhu and the army of the Muslimin. After the opening of Al-Mada'in, the Yazdajraj, the head of the Persian Empire, had fled from Al-Mada'in to an area called Jalawla or Halwan. And then after Jalawla he fled to Halwan, and he continued fleeing from the Muslimin. When he had fled to Jalawla, which was behind Al-Mada'in, the Islamic army in the leadership of Hashim ibn Abi Utbah ibn Abi Waqqas continued its march towards Jalawla, and that's in Rabi' al-Awwal or the beginning of Rabi' al-Thani. And all of this, as we mentioned, the head of the Muslim armies at that time was Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiyallahu anhu, and he was sending out the armies to the different areas within Persia while he remained in Al-Mada'in. They stayed in Al-Mada'in for a month and a half, and we said that when they arrived to Mada'in, it was on a Friday, and it was the first Jum'ah prayer that they had prayed in 4 years. 4 years they were fighting in Persia, they had never prayed Salatul Jum'ah because they were always traveling and they were always on the battlefield. So when they reached Al-Mada'in, the center of the Persian Empire, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiyallahu anhu, one of the first things he did, as we mentioned, he prayed Salatul Fath, the opening or the prayer of the opening, and then he prayed Jum'ah that day, Salatul Jum'ah on that Friday. And it was the first Jum'ah that they had prayed in 4 years because of the continuous fighting that was taking place. So they had stayed in Al-Mada'in for a month and a half, regathering themselves after the booty of war, the Ghanima, was sent to Al-Madinah, was sent to Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. This great amount of booty of war, of Ghanima, that was taken from Al-Mada'in and was sent, Al-Khumus, 1/5 of it was sent to Umar radiyallahu anhu in Al-Madinah. And we mentioned some of the description of the booty of war that they had gathered in Al-Mada'in, things that they had never seen in their life. Because the Persian Empire, they had gathered over the decades that they were there, all the different jewelries, all the different pearls, all the different gold and things that the Muslimin ones, or those who lived in Mecca, those who lived in Medina, had never seen the likes of. The majority of the Muslimin at that time had never even left Mecca and Medina. And that's why, as we'll come to see, in Jalawla, the amount of booty of war, because the number of soldiers was less, the distribution of the booty of war to each soldier was more than Al-Mada'in. Because the number of the army was less, which was about 12,000 on the side of the Muslimin. When they reached to Jalawla, it was an area that was fortified in a great matter and in a big matter. What they had done is, first you have, of course, the fortress of the area, and then you have the trench that is dug in front of the fortress. And the trench that was dug was a very large trench. And they would leave an area, a small area, in which they can exit and enter into the fortress, but never large enough for an army to enter from. And it's narrow enough for them to send out groups to fight the Muslimin, but not wide enough for an entire army to enter into the area or to enter to fight the Persians who were in the actual fortress itself. And then after the trench, they would place wooden spikes to make sure that the horses cannot come close to the entry as well, or the door or the entry of the fortress as well. So they were very fortified, and that was the majority, if not all, of the fortresses that were in Persia at that time. They had fortified them that way. So they would come down through that narrow area and they would fight with the Muslimin, and anything beyond the wooden spikes was in the range of the archers of the Persians. So anyone who would come after or beyond that, the archers would be there. So they would come out and they would fight the Muslimin and go back in. And this continued for 80 different skirmishes that took place between the Muslimin and between the Persian army at that time in that area. And every time the Muslimin would be victorious. Every time the Muslimin would be victorious, and they remained like that for 7 months. 7 months, the Muslimin are patient, they're waiting, they're fighting, and the Persians also, they're waiting, and they're only allowing small groups to go out and then to come out, or to return to the palace, to return to the fortress of the Persians. One of the days, the Persians let out a large group, thinking that they can get rid of, because they're stuck in the fortress. 7 months have gone past. The resources that they have, the food, the ability to maintain their strength for that period of time started to weaken. So the Muslimin here, they are waiting outside, and they are able to bring reinforcements from outside. But those who are sieged inside the fortress, they are day by day, you have a large army, and you have to feed that army. You need water, you need food, you need reinforcements, you need the ability, the archers. There's many things that need to be taken care of inside the fortress. So the Persian army, when the time 7 months had gone past, they sent a large army out to fight the Muslimin. So here Al-Qa'qa' ibn Amr al-Tamimi rahimahullah ta'ala, he came with an idea. When he saw them exiting, he rushed towards the center of the army to take the door of the fortress. And then when he reached to that area, he called out, "Come and save your leader, Hashim ibn Abi Utbah ibn Waqqas," who was the leader of the army at that time. And he said that to boost the army of the Muslimin to come and to save their leader. To come and to save their leader. So when they heard that, they rushed towards the front gates of Jalawla, and they were able to get rid of the Persian army who was at that time in Jalawla. And the fighting went from day up until night. And then after the sun had set, there were 600 from the Muslimin, soldiers from the Muslimin who had come as reinforcement for the Muslimin. From amongst them, Tulayha ibn Khuwaylid al-Asdi, Amr ibn Ma'ad Yakrib, and Qais ibn Makshuh. These are well-known knights in the Muslim army at that time, especially Tulayha ibn Khuwaylid al-Asdi, whom we've mentioned his name many times before in the different battles that took place with the Muslimin. And then they were able to break the fortress, or the beginning of the fortress of the Persians at that time. And then when they were able to enter into the first line of defense, now is broken. The first line of defense of the Persian army is broken, and they were able to enter into the area of the Persians, and they were able to take over the Persian army that was around in that area at that time. And there was a very large number of Persians who were killed during that battle, because they'd come out, they'd fight, and they'd return, they'd come out, they'd fight, and they'd return. The numbers vary. The numbers reach up to 100,000. The numbers reach up to 100,000 of the Persians who were killed during that battle. And then when they realized the loss that they were gaining, they fled from Jalawla to an area which is close to Jalawla, which is an area a couple of about 30 or 40 kilometers north of Jalawla, called Khanqeen. And they had taken with them all their women, all their jewelry, all of their that which they could hold, and they took it with them. And Al-Qaqa' ibn Amr, he followed them there, and the Muslimin were able to take all of that booty of war as well. And I'm rushing through some of the events so that we can get to the next battles, and the battles that had a greater effect on the fall of the Persian Empire. So the booty of war that was gained from these battles, Al-Khums was sent to Umar radiallahu anhu in Medina. And then when the booty of war reached Medina, it was from the sunnah of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu is that he would not allow it to remain. He would straight away distribute it between the people. So when the booty of war had reached, he left it in the masjid, and he ordered Abdurrahman ibn Auf, another companion, to guard the booty of war during the night. And then when he came in the morning, radiallahu anhu, and they uncovered the booty of war, and he looked at the jewels, the pearls, the gold, the different adornments that they had brought from the Persian lands, he started to cry radiallahu anhu. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he started to cry. So Abdurrahman ibn Auf, he says, Wallahi ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, inna hadha la mawtinu shukrin. He says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, this is a place of thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, that is not why I'm crying, O Abdurrahman. He says, I am crying because the such that is in front of you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not given it to a people illa tahasadu wa tabaghadu. This amount of dunya, this amount of gold, of pearls, of jewels, it wasn't given to anyone except that it created between them envy and hatred. Except that it created amongst them envy and hatred. And the people don't envy the Muslimin amongst each other. Once they envy and hate one another, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's like they've broken their own back with their own hands. When Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says in the famous hadith, al-hadith mashhur, Wallahi mal faqru akhsha alaykum. It is not poverty that I fear upon you. لكن أخشى أن تفتح لكم الدنيا فتنافسوها كما تنافسوها فتهلككم كما أهلكتهم. So it's not poverty that I fear for you. It's the opening of this dunya. And you will compete for gaining this dunya like the people before you competed, and it will destroy you like it destroyed them. It will destroy you like it will destroy them. And the opening of the dunya, my dear brothers and sisters in Islam, can be a sort of a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it can be a form of istidraj, a form of slowly bringing the person in, and then the person becoming, as they say, a worshipper of the dunya. And this is, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions in the Quran about the kuffar, فَلَمَّا نَسُوا مَا ذُكِّرُوا بِهِ. When they forgot, when they left that which we reminded them of, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? فَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ أَبْوَابَ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ حَتَّى إِذَا فَرِحُوا بِمَا أُوتُوا أَخَذْنَاهُمْ بَغْتَةً فَإِذَا هُمْ مُبْلِسُونَ فَقُطِعَ دَابِرَ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا وَالْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. When they forgot what they were reminded of, the Qur'an, the dhikr, the Islam, when they forgot and they left it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't send upon them poverty or didn't deprive them. فَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ أَبْوَابَ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He opened the doors of everything to them, gave them everything, until they were enjoying what they were given, they were happy for what they were given. أَخَذْنَاهُمْ بَغْتَةً. They were taken suddenly. Maut al-ghafla, a time or death at the time of heedlessness. Maut al-ghafla is one of the deaths that the person doesn't want to fall or doesn't want to be upon. When they are in a time of heedlessness, when they are in a time of forgetting, the last thing on their mind is death. The last thing that they are thinking about is death, and then death comes. At that moment, death comes. Maut al-ghafla. That's why Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he constantly told the Sahaba to remember the what? To remember the destroyer of desires. Always remember the destroyer of desires. Always remember death. Visit the grave. I had ordered you not to visit the grave. ألا إني كنت قد نهيتكم أو نهيتكم عن زيارة القبور. ألا فزوروها فإنها تذكركم الموت. I had forbidden you from visiting the graves. Verily visit them. For verily it reminds you of what? Reminds you of death. When you go to the grave, and you look at the people in the dirt, it reminds you of death. It reminds you that one day you are going to be in that same position that these people are in. It reminds you of death. For Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he saw all of this beauty of war coming to Medina, these jewels, these pearls, things that they have never seen, it scared Umar, in the sense that this dunya, when it opens to the person, rarely is the person safe from the delusion of the dunya, or from the dunya turning them away from their path to the akhirah. Because the dunya is what? Dunya hulwatun khadira. As the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, dunya hulwa khadra, it's nice, it looks nice, it's green, it attracts the person. But the dunya at the end of the day is what? وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. It's an enjoyment of a delusion. It ends, it's going to go. So Umar, he used to always seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the beauty of war that came from Jalawla, because of how much it was and the amount of beauty of war that was there, from fear that it will khalas, they would sit and rest and I won't go out to jihad anymore. After that, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he sent the orders to Al-Qaqa to head towards Halwan, where the leader of the Persian Empire had fled from Jalawla, had fled from Al-Madain to Jalawla, from Jalawla to Halwan. As soon as he would sense himself that there is no safety, he would straight away flee the area that he was in, or the area that the Muslimin were fighting in. So he went from Halwan to Medina called, or area called Al-Ray, and he left Halwan empty, and Al-Qaqa' ibn Amr was able to take over Halwan. After Halwan, Hashim ibn Utbah ibn Abi Waqqas, he sent out different groups to cleanse the area, or to cleanse the area that was around. There's areas at that time, you have the main cities, to make sure that the area around was also cleansed as well. So he sent a group under the leadership of Jarir ibn Abdullah al-Bujali radiyallahu anhu, one of the famous Sahaba, to a Medina, to an area called Shahrazur. To an area called Shahrazur. And all of these areas, you'll find their names, it's all in the Persian Empire. It's all in, these days, northern Iran, or the areas north of Iran. All of these areas, Shahrazur. And Shahrazur, subhanAllah, Shahrazur is an area that in the 7th century, one of the scholars of Islam, one of the main scholars of hadith in Islam, was from Shahrazur. And a lot of the names that you will find, a lot of the scholars of Islam came from these areas. Abu Dawood al-Sijistani, Abu Isa al-Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah al-Qazwini, all of the Imam al-Nasa'i, all of these ulama of Islam came from these areas, that were opened by the Muslimin. And this is here we're talking about the 20th year after the Hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ. These scholars came 200 years after. 200 years was sufficient enough for great scholars of Islam to come out of these areas, and to be not only great scholars of Islam, the main books of hadith come from, or the narrators come from these areas. Abu al-Hakim al-Naysaburi. And you'll find that many of the scholars came from these areas. Shahrazur, al-Imam Ibn al-Salah al-Shahrazuri, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the known scholars of Islam, came from this area. He opened it with a treaty, and there was no fighting in it. And the people of Shahrazur, they agreed to pay the jizya to the Muslimin. Hashim ibn Abi Utbah ibn Abi Waqqas, he continued with the armies, and he opened all of that area, and it became under the leadership of the Muslimin. After Al-Qaqa', he controlled Halwan. He employed upon Halwan Qubadh, and Qubadh was the first Persian Muslim to be put in a position of leadership. And a lot of the Persians after Al-Madain, a lot of Persians became Muslim. And these Persians, they became Muslim, and they straight away entered the battlefield with the Muslimin. At the same time, after the opening of Al-Madain, the Muslimin marched towards an area called Tikrit, under the leadership of Abdullah ibn al-Mu'attam, rahimahullah ta'ala, and it's about 220 kilometers from Al-Madain towards the north, where one of the armies that was coming from Al-Mosul was gathering in that area. And the army that was coming from Al-Mosul had Persians, had Arabs, and had Romans in it as well. So three groups, Persians, Romans, and Arabs, were in that army coming from Al-Mosul towards Tikrit. So Abdullah ibn al-Mu'attam, he reached to it, he put a siege on the area, and it was a fortress that was the same as the previous fortresses that we have mentioned. And he besieged it for around 40 days, rahimahullah ta'ala. And the group, because it was Persians, Romans, and Arabs, it didn't have the same strength as the previous ones. Why? Because they were mixed. Romans were there for their own personal benefits, the Arabs were there for their own personal benefits, and the Persians were there for their own personal benefits. So they weren't on what? They didn't all have the same intention. They didn't all have the same benefit of being there. And when you have groups like that, there's always going to be what? It's going to be less. So when the Romans, after the Muslimin continued fighting for 40 days, the Romans saw how the Muslimin are coming closer and closer. So they got the intention to leave the Persians. This is not our fight. And at the same time, the Romans are fighting the Muslimin in Bilad al-Sham. So we say, we'll leave this fight here. We're not in need of this, and we'll take our ships and we'll leave. And the area was on one of the banks of Dajla, one of the famous rivers, big rivers in Iraq. So when the word came to the Muslimin that the Romans are going to leave and they're going to flee, Abdullah ibn al-Mu'attam, he got in contact with the Arab in that area. He said, we'll make a deal with you. You take care of the Arab, or you take care of the rear of the fortress, and we'll come from the front of the fortress. When you hear our takbir, you enter from the back and you surround them. So when the Muslimin pushed forward towards the fortress and the Romans saw the Muslimin coming, they did the takbir. They tried to flee from the back of the fortress. The Arab came in front of them and they clashed with the Arab, or with the Arabs who were in the area at that time. And they were able to what? They were able to take over the fortress of Tikrit. After Tikrit, Abdullah ibn Mu'attam, he sent Rabi' ibn al-Afkal ila al-Hisnayn Ninawa and al-Mosul. He sent one of the leaders of the army to an area called Ninawa. Ninawa, you've probably heard of it on the news, and al-Mosul. These are areas, known areas in Iraq as well. So he sent one of the leaders to these areas he said to him, Isbiq al-Khabar. Go there straight away and beat the news before the news reaches that Tikrit has fallen. So he told him to ride during the day and during the night to get there before. So he went there and he arrived at Ninawa and al-Mosul. Ninawa is the area in which the grave of Yunus alayhi salam is in an area called Ninawa. Ninawa was also, if you remember in the seerah, after the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he left at Ta'if and they had stoned him, and he came and there was a Christian boy who had goats for one of the Arab. His name was Addas. So when this Christian boy, he came to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam and he gave him food, he gave him refreshment. When the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, Bismillah. He said, he got strange. He said, how do you say this? Only the prophets and messengers, and only the Arabs never say this word. Ninawa was that area in which Addas was from, who later on became Muslim, radiyallahu anhu. So they were able to beat the news, and they were able to open Ninawa and al-Mosul with at-Tikrit, and all of this happened. Yani there was never only one side that was fighting with the Muslimin. We mentioned that there was three main areas in which the Muslimin were moving forward in. So at the same time that the fighting is happening here, the fighting is happening in another area, and it's continuing. And at the same time, as we are mentioning in Iraq, the openings are happening in Sham, in Syria, Palestine, Damascus, all of these areas. So it's not all battles that are taking place after each other. No, they're all simultaneously taking place. And Umar radiallahu anhu is controlling all of this from Medina. Umar radiallahu anhu is controlling all of this from Medina. And no army would move, whether it's to this area or to that area, except after the orders of Umar radiallahu anhu. And as we mentioned before, the messages were daily going back and forward between Umar and between the leaders and between the generals of the army. And they had no such thing back then as telecommunications as we have today. There was no ease of communication and ways of communication that we have today. No, it was all done by horse. They used to ride and ride back, ride and ride back. And this was done, they'd send the rider, next day, the rider hasn't even reached yet, another rider would go out with another message. So the messages will come daily to Umar radiallahu anhu, and they would go out daily from Umar. And he controlled all of this from Medina. And it's as if, subhanAllah, to see the genius of Umar. Umar never been to Persia, never been to Iraq, never been to Persia, never been to these areas. But because what he used to do, radiallahu anhu, he used to tell the leaders, the generals, to describe to him the geography of the areas that they're in. So he said, when you reach this area, when you send the letter, describe to me the geography, the mountains, the roads, the rivers, the kada. When the letters would come to Umar, it's like he would visualize it in front of him. It's as if he would visualize it in front of him. So tell him, go this way, go that way, go. And this is from the genius of Umar radiallahu anhu. And he'd never been to these areas. He's never been to Iraq, never been to Persia. And yet he would direct the armies as if he was there, as if he could see it in front of him. And this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After Tikrit, an area called Hormuz, an area called Hormuz, which is also, a lot of the famous ulama came from that area. Al-Rama Hormuzi, one of the first books of hadith were written in Mustalah from the author is Al-Rama Hormuzi. Al-Rama Hormuzi. After the Persians started to gather again, after the king Yazdajrad had began to gather the armies again, and they gathered in Rama Hormuz under the leadership of Al Hormuz Anne, one of the leaders of the Persians at that time. And Umar al Khattab, he ordered Sa'd to get an army ready from Ahl al-Kufa under the leadership of An-Nu'man ibn Muqarrin, and Abu Musa to prepare an army from Al-Basra under the leadership of Sahal ibn Sa'd or ibn Adi. And if the two armies gathered together, then Abu Sabra ibn Abi Raham was the leader on them. And we just mentioned the names so that for the names to be known. So Nu'man ibn Muqarrin, he went towards Al Hormuz Anne, who was at that time in Rama Hormuz. And when he heard, Al Hormuz Anne heard that the Muslim armies were coming towards him, he wanted to go out and be the one who begins the fighting before the Muslims reach him, so that he can have an upper hand upon them. So when Al-Nu'man and Al Hormuz Anne, they met with each other, a great fight took place and a great battle took place. And Al-Nu'man ibn Muqarrin was able to defeat Al Hormuz Anne by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Rama Hormuz, he ran away and he went towards Tastur. Sahal ibn Adi, he marched towards with the people of Al-Basra, wanting also Rama Hormuz. After he heard what happened with Sahal ibn Adi, he went to Al-Ahwaz. Al-Ahwaz is an area that is known even till our day today. Al-Ahwaz is an area in Iran. Al-Ahwaz today is an area in Iran which the majority population are Muslimin Sunnah. Are Muslimin Sunnah. In an area called Al-Ahwaz. It's a known area, and the oppression and the torture of the Iranians and the Shia of the Muslimin in those areas is known. It's an area called Al-Ahwaz, and it's the closest to the Arabian Peninsula and to those areas. So he went to Al-Ahwaz, and he went to the marketplace of Al-Ahwaz, and that's where the battle took place. And they were able to open Tastur as well, under the leadership of Abu Sabra. And the infantry kept on coming in, the aid kept on coming in from the Muslimin, from Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. And subhanAllah, the opening of the fortress of Tastur was from information given inside of the fortress. They gave information to the Muslimin outside that the only way to enter into the fortress is from a waterway. So Abu Musa al-Ash'ari and Al-Nu'man ibn Muqarrin, they met each other in that area with their fighters, and they entered the city from the waterways. And they were able to enter into the city and to open the city. During this battle, not to go into details, Al-Bara ibn Malik was martyred in this battle. Anyone know who Al-Bara ibn Malik is? Al-Bara ibn Malik is one of the Sahaba radiyallahu anhu, which the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says in the hadith, كم من أشعث أغبر ذي طمرين لو أقسم على الله لأبره. How many people out there whom you never heard of, you don't know who they are, and if they are absent, they're not asked about. لو أقسم على الله لأبره. If they were to make an oath by Allah, Allah will fulfill their oath. When Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, منهم البراء ibn Malik. From them is Al-Bara ibn Malik radiyallahu anhu. So they called upon Al-Bara, make dua for us that Allah gives us the victory. So Al-Bara ibn Malik, he made the dua for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give them victory, and then he added to it, and to give me the shahada. And to give me the shahada. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gave the Muslimin victory, and he gave Al-Bara ibn Malik a shahada. He gave him the martyrdom that he was seeking, the martyrdom that he wanted. And Al-Hormuz Anne was taken as a prisoner of war, and he was sent to Umar radiyallahu anhu in Medina. And when he was sent to Umar in Medina, the famous story of how they met and the conversation that took place between them is mentioned in the history books, where they brought Al-Hormuz Anne to Medina, and they dressed him with his jewelry, with his clothes that he used to use, that he used to wear before, with all of his clothing. And they brought him to Umar. So they came to the masjid looking for Umar, he wasn't there. So they went around looking for Umar. They heard that he was in the masjid, but he was asleep in one of the corners of the masjid. He had his amama on, he had a group that was coming. He met them, after he met them, he took his imamah off and he took it as a pillow and he slept. So this Hormuz Anne, he's one of the leaders of Persia. He's entered upon the Kisra himself, the leader of the Persian army, whom to speak with him you have to be 15 meters away from him to be able to speak with him. And you can't look up towards him. And the surroundings that they used to have around them. So he's coming to Medina, wanting to meet Umar, the leader of the Muslimin, the one who has broken the back of the Persians in Persia and Iraq, thinking that he's coming to meet this big man on a throne with this center of leadership with Kada. And Umar, where was he? He was asleep in the masjid. He was in the masjid in a corner, putting his head on the floor, and he's sleeping. So when they come in, they're looking for Umar. Al-Hormuz Anne, he says, where's Umar? They say he's there, he's sleeping. He says, where's Ayn al-Hujjab? Where are the ones that open and close the doors? Where's the haras? Where's the security? Where's the bodyguards? Where's the kada? He says, there's nothing, no such thing. He's in the masjid, he's got his head on the floor and he's sleeping. He's got his head on the floor, he's sleeping. That's why one of the Romans, when the Romans came and they saw Umar, and he had put his back on a tree and he had taken a nap. He had taken a nap. He said to him, that was translated, Hakamta adalta, aminta fanimta. You ruled, you were just. And because you were just, you were given security, so you went to sleep. Yani the leaders of the Persian, the Romans, the kada, the bodyguards, the security, the ones who opened the doors, the kada, when they came and they saw the Muslimin, they saw Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman or Ali, they looked at them, their clothing. Umar radiallahu anhu, it was known, his jubba had patches on it. Had patches on it that he used to walk in. When he went to Palestine to open Palestine and they gave him the new clothing, they said, no, you're going, there's big people there, there's gather, it's best if you dress and you wear something nice. So he put it on, he couldn't. It was itchy and gather, he took it off, he put back on his normal jubba. He went in and said, I can't wear it. I can't. And this was the Amir, this was the most powerful man on earth at that time. And that's how they lived. That's how they lived. Because all of the leaders at that time, the main thing that they would pay anything for, they didn't have, which was security. Or inner security. When they can put their head on their bed at night and they go to sleep without worry. That's why I mentioned Al-Mada'in, the White Castle in Al-Mada'in, there was no windows. When they reached it, there was no windows. Why? Because he was scared, Kisra, when he built it, he said, I want it with no windows. From fear of someone coming in at night through a window and killing him. So he said, I want no windows. No windows at all. And then they come and they see Umar in the corner of the masjid, on the dirt, on the hassa, and he's sleeping and he's resting. So he sits up and he says, is this Hormuz Anne? They say yes. And he looks at him, he's got his jewelry on, he's got his gather. He said, what has this benefited you, O Hormuz Anne? Look where you are now. You're standing in front of me, sitting on the floor. No difference between me and the general people around me. What has this benefited you? He said, let me speak with you. He said, I won't speak with you until you take off those clothing. I will never speak to you in those clothing. So they removed his jewelry, all his clothing that they used to have, that they used to wear, and they gave him some normal clothing to wear, and he sat in front of Umar. So Umar radiallahu anhu, to make a long story short, he gave him security. He says, I want to drink water. He says, take water. And they gave it to him in a cup that they used to drink with. The cup that Amir al-Mu'mineen used to drink with. He said, Wallah, if I'm on my deathbed, I will not drink from this cup. So they brought him a cleaner cup. And they said to him, drink. He said, I'm fearful that you will kill me before I drink. He said, no, I won't kill you before you drink. This is bring him water. لا يجتمع عليه أمرين العطش والقتل. So two things don't combine or gather upon him, being thirsty and dying. Now give him water, let him quench his thirst, and then we'll kill him. So when he took that security of Umar, he said, I'm not going to drink water. He says, إِذَا أَقْتُلُكَ, I'll kill you. He says, no, you gave me security. So he tricked Umar radiallahu anhu. He says, the only way I'll give you security is if you become Muslim. And in the books of history, they mention that he did become Muslim. Al Hormuz Anne, he became Muslim, and Umar left him in Medina. And then the days go past, and the books, they mention that he was the one who aided Abu Lu'lu al-Majusi in the killing of Umar. When Abu Lu'lu al-Majusi, he came to Medina, Abu Lu'lu al-Majusi, al-Majusa, who the worshippers of the fire, al-Majus, he was aided by Al Hormuz Anne, who was in Medina at that time. And then Al Hormuz Anne was killed by the son of Umar later on, and it continued that way. But Al Hormuz Anne wasn't killed by Umar because he had given him security. And he said, I won't break my word. And that was the end of Al Hormuz Anne. That was the end of Al Hormuz Anne. The last battle that we will mention is the battle of Maiwand, which is called Fath al-Futuh, the opening of openers. And Maiwand is the last battle that we mention in the fall of the Persian Empire, because after the battle of Maiwand, the Persian army never gathered again after it. The Persian army, after the battle of Maiwand, they never gathered together after this battle. And this was the last confrontation between the Persians and between the Muslims. That was of a big number. And after they had begun, and this was after a 4-year period, after a 4-year period of pausing, they began to gather the Persian army again under the leadership of Al-Fayrazan. And they had gathered, the Persian army had gathered the people from Sijistan, from the different areas in Persia, and they all gathered together in an area called Maiwand. And Maiwand was a rocky and mountainy area, you can't easily reach it, and you can't get there with a large army in an easy way. And it was in winter at that time, and those areas in winter is very cold, very snowy. And the Muslimin, you're talking about Muslimin who lived their entire life in Mecca, in Medina, in 40+ degrees heat. So the cold was something that they weren't used to. So this was an advantage for them, and they had gathered themselves in this area. So Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, he was in Al-Kufa at that time when he heard that the Persians were gathering. So he wrote a letter to Umar. So Umar, he gathered the shura, he gathered the people of opinion, and he decided to send an army to fight them at their last stance, and the last stance with the Persians. And at that time, An-Nu'man ibn Muqarrin was the worker of Umar on an area called Kaskur. So An-Nu'man ibn Muqarrin, he's a man from Medina, he's a man from the Arab. He sent a letter to Umar. Before that, he sent a letter to Umar. He said to him, Inna mathali wa mathali kuskur. The example of me and the area that you have put me head of. كمثل رجل شاب إلى جنبه مونسة تلون له. It's like the example of a young man, and sitting next to him is a beautiful woman. And she's got her perfume on, and she's fixed herself up for him. Yani it's a fitna, it's a distraction. It's keeping me away from my ibadah, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's taking me away from jihad. He says, so please get me out of this place and send me with one of the armies of the Muslimin. Because he can't just pick up and leave, because he's got orders from Umar as a worker there. He said, please, Umar, it's like you've put me, a young man, you've put me next to a very beautiful woman who's walking around him with her perfume on and trying to take him away from his deen. He said, this is the example. Please get me out of here and get me out of this area. So Umar, he decided to give the leadership of the army going to Maiwand to An-Nu'man ibn Muqarrin. And from the Sahaba that were in that army was Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, Abdullah ibn Umar radiyallahu anhuma, and many of the Sahaba were with the Muslimin in that army, which was, the number of it was 30,000 of the Muslimin. And it was a very fortified area with large trenches around it, and in front of the trenches the wooden spikes, as we mentioned before. And the Persian army was inside the fortress, and Al-Fayrazan had his archers towards the Muslimin, so whenever they come close they use their archers straight away upon the Muslimin. After An-Nu'man Muqarrin trying a couple of times to reach the fortress, he wasn't able to do so. So Tulayha, who was amongst the Muslim army at that time, he put a plan together to bring out the Persian army. And there's different narrations of the plans. One of them was that they put the plan together to make it as if the Muslim army is retreating, and to send a small group of the Muslimin to go to the front and to try to fight them and to bring out the Persian army, because they're sitting in there and they're fortified. So you have to bring them out, you have to give them bait to bring them out, you have to lure them out. So they sent this group of Muslimin after they had made it that they have left, and they sent a group. The head of that group was Al-Qa'qa' ibn Amr. So the group went and lured out the Persian army. And they had set a plan that when the Persian army comes out, you wait for my order, and Nu'man ibn Muqarrin, you wait for my order, and then you attack the Persian army and you attack the fortress of the Persian army. And when Al-Qa'qa' ibn Amr, he went towards the fortress, he was able to lure them out. The Persians, they saw this small group, the Muslims had left, and they had made it as if they had left. So the Persian army came out, they're easy for us to kill, they're easy for us to take over. So they lured them out, and then Nu'man Muqarrin, he gave the order, and the Muslimin attacked the fortress and attacked the Persian army, and a very fierce battle took place. They say it was the same as the battle of Al-Qadisiyah, between the Muslimin and between the Persian army, that lasted the whole day. And the Muslimin were able to defeat the Persian army, and that was the last stance of the Persian army, the last real fight that the Muslimin had taken against the Persians at that time. And Al-Fayrazan, Al-Qa'qa' ibn Amr, he went after Al-Fayrazan, he was able to catch him, and Al-Fayrazan, his life was ended on the hands of Al-Qa'qa' ibn Amr, and these were the leaders of the Persian armies. They were all taken out. The leader himself, Yazdajrad, he had fled and he'd keep on fleeing, running away from the Muslimin and not allowing the Muslimin to catch him. After Nahawand, as we said, it was called Fathul Futuh, and this was the last period of the openings in Persia. After Nahawand, the Muslimin were able to penetrate the Persian lands and the lands at that time and take over the majority of the lands at that time. And Umar radiallahu anhu, before that, he wanted to bring a halt. He wanted to bring a halt, a stop to the penetration of the Muslim armies, the stop of the Muslim armies going into Persia or the Persian lands. He wanted them to stop and to begin focusing on the lands that they have opened. To make sure that they establish, to make sure that the da'wah is being done. Because it's not, as we mentioned many times before, it's not just about opening lands and fighting and taking over lands. No, it's about spreading the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's about spreading the da'wah, calling the people to Islam, bringing them to become Muslimin. And as we mentioned, 200 years later, the books of hadith began to come out. The compilers of these books were from these areas. Were from these areas that the Muslimin, they opened. And through the da'wah of the Sahaba, the da'wah of the Muslimin, the preaching that they did, and these people entering into Islam, these areas became rich in the Islamic sciences and in the Islamic research and in fiqh, in hadith, in tafsir, in all the fields of the Islamic sciences. They came from these areas of the Muslimin, also from, of course, Jazirat al-Arab, the Arabian Peninsula. So this was the fall of the Persian Empire, and this is how the Persian Empire fought, and the Muslimin had entered into Persia now, and there was no real fight after Nahawand, which was in 21st year of Hijrah, 21st, 11 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the promise that he had made when they were digging the trench in the battle of Al-Khandaq, the battle of Al-Ahzab, when he hit the rock, the boulder, and he said, I see the white castles of Persia, I've been given the keys of Persia. Not even 11 years after his death, the promise came true. And the Persian Empire had fallen, even though the leader was still there. And Umar radiallahu anhu, after Al-Ahnaf ibn Qais, he came to Umar and he said, you shouldn't bring a halt to the advancement of the Muslim armies. Because as long as Yazdajrad is there, he'll continue to try and to bring back the Persians. So you need to continue. You need to allow the Muslimin to continue their march towards the Persian lands. And after hearing this, Umar radiallahu anhu, he gave the permission to do so. But there was no really any fight that took place after the battle of Nahawand. And this, you can say, was the end of the Persian Empire. And this is how the Persian Empire had ended. And all of this took, Umar radiallahu anhu, he took the Khilafah, or he became Khalifa, 13th year of Hijrah. By 21st year of Hijrah, within 7 years, 7-8 years, a whole empire, the whole Persian Empire was taken out. 7-8 years. 7-8 years, the whole, there was no such thing as a Persian Empire existing. And at that time, this was something that, the Persians and the Romans were at it with each other for decades. And the Muslimin, when they took the initiative to actually get into that fight that was already existing between the Muslimin and the Persians, between the Muslimin and the Roman, to actually get into that fight, it took them 8 years, 7 years, and the Persian Empire had fallen, had crumbled in front of the armies of the Muslimin. And this is a lesson. That's why do we speak about history? We speak about history because in the history we find the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave these people victory. How He gave these people victory. And why did He give them victory? Because of the sincerity. That's why in every battle that we see, every battle that we mention, we see the sincerity of, whether it's the Sahaba or the Tabi'een or the armies, the sincerity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, towards the da'wah, towards Islam. Through this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave them victory over one of the most powerful empires at that time. And the Muslimin were always less in numbers, less in actual war equipment, less in everything. The Muslimin were always less, but they were always stronger in their iman, always stronger in their faith. In tansurullaha yansurkum. You give victory to Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give victory to you. And they had these leaders like Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali. They had leaders who understood Islam, who understood what needed to be done as Muslimin. That's why, and we'll finish on this, that's why at the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, a man came to him and said, "Oh Ali, why is it at your time and at the time of Uthman, and especially at your time after the fitna took place, Mawqa'at al-Jamal and Siffin, and the fitna had begun in the time of Ali radiallahu anhu." He said, why didn't this happen between the Muslimin in the times of Abu Bakr, at times of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and at your times the fitna has struck the ummah? He said, you want to know the reason why it didn't happen in their times? He said, yes. He said, because they had men like me. Ali radiallahu anhu, he's saying, he says, because Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, they had men like me. As for me, I have men like you. Men who come, they complain, they whinge, they sook. Why is this happening? Why is not this? Why is kada? And not men of action, like Ali radiallahu anhu was to the previous khulafa. I have men like you who whinge, who sook, who cry, why is this happening? Why is it me? Why is this kada? When they had men like me, men of action, men who feed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the difference. The men, the leadership and the followers. The leadership and the followers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala return to the Muslimin the izzah that they had throughout the khulafa, throughout the history of Islam, and bring back the Muslimin to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Bring us back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way that we should, and which we will gain the victory. The ummah at the time, at this moment, my dear brothers in Islam, the ummah is bleeding. Everywhere you look around in the Muslim ummah, there is bleeding, there is killing, there is fitna, there is destruction. Everywhere you look these days, that's all that's happening with the Muslimin. And the only way that this will stop is when we return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the only way that we return is if each and every one of us as individuals has to think that my sin, my bad, that which I am doing can have an effect on the ummah. And my good, my righteousness can also have a positive effect on the ummah. And you look throughout the history of Islam, a lot of the times it was one person. All it took was the iman, the righteousness, the taqwa of one person. And they were able to change the events of history. They were able to bring back to the Muslimin the izzah. And this is how us as Muslimin we have to think. That my sin, my individual sin can have a negative effect on the ummah, and my individual righteousness can have a positive effect on the ummah. Because if we're all going to think, shaitan's going to think that, oh look at everyone's doing this, everyone's doing that. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He told the Prophet ﷺ this in the Quran, وَلَا يُعْجِبُكَ كَثْرَةَ الْخَبِيثِ. Just because, and it's always going to be throughout history, that the majority of people are on the wrong. The majority of people, even as Muslimin, are doing wrong. But not just because everyone's doing the wrong, then you go and you join. That's why Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لا تكن كالإمعة. Don't be like an im'a. Al-im'a is who the person doesn't have his own decision. If he sees the people doing good, he follows them. He sees the people stopping, not doing anything, he doesn't do anything. No, be the one who takes the first step. Be the one who takes putting the achievement and taking the step forward towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Don't be from those who, if they're doing good, if they're going to the masjid, I'll go to the masjid. If they're going to the lesson, I'll go to the lesson. If they're doing good, I'll do good. If he's giving charity, I'll give charity. Then if the person's not doing anything, everyone stops. No, you have to be the one that takes the step forward. You have to be the one, because at the end of the day, each and every one of us is going to stand alone in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And none of us are going to, you can't bring any of your groups, any of the people, any of gather, ask them, no. Farda. Every person alone is going to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inshallah ta'ala, in the next lessons to come, we'll begin or we'll start to speak about the infiltration of the Muslimin, the battles that took place in Asham, the opening of Damascus, the opening of Palestine, of Baytul Maqdis, the opening of Egypt. All of this took place also during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, to continue the legacy, to continue having the knowledge of the history of the Khulafa al-Rashideen, so that we can live upon their path and we can take lessons from their times. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Every Muslim dreams to be up in Jannah, 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 Jannah. A pious person's destiny. Inshallah in Jannah, Jannah, Jannah.